Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grail Country. Welcome to another episode of On Fairy Stories with myself and Eugene Terrican. We're just going to continue doing a read through of the essay. I don't know. I want to call it an essay, but this seems to be a longer version of the talk that he gave. So, yeah, we're just going to continue the read through and comment as we go along. So, Eugene, did you want to begin reading?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I
Okay.
remember where I left off. Okay. So philology has been dethroned from the high place it once had in this court of inquiry. Max Muller's view of mythology as a disease of language can be abandoned without regret. Mythology is not a disease at all, though it may, like all human things, become diseased.
Mm.
You might as well say that thinking is a disease of the mind. It would be more near the truth to say that languages, especially modern European languages, are a disease of mythology. Oh my goodness. Uh, but language, okay, and then he capitalizes language, which is very interesting. But
Yeah.
language cannot, all the same, be dismissed. The incarnate mind, the tongue, and the tail are in our world coeval. Is it coeval or
Coeval. Yeah, coeval.
coeval? Oh yeah, coeval.
I
So
don't even know.
coexistent, right?
I don't know. I'm going to look it up because
All
I've
right.
heard it before, but I don't remember.
All right, I'll keep reading.
Yeah.
The human mind, endowed with the powers of generalization and abstraction, sees not only green grass, discriminating it from other things, and finding it fair to look upon, but sees that it is green as well as being grass. But how powerful, how stimulating to the very faculty that produced it was the invention of the adjective. No spell or incantation in fairy is more potent, and that is not surprising. Such incantations might indeed be said to be only another view of adjectives, a part of speech in a mythical grammar. The mind that thought of light, heavy, gray, yellow, still, swift, also conceived of magic that would make heavy things light and able
Mm.
to fly, turn gray into yellow gold, and the still rock into a swift water. If it could do the one, it could do the other. It, sorry, if it could do the one, it could do the other. It inevitably did both. When we can take green from the grass, blue from heaven, and red from blood, we have already an enchanter's power
Mm.
upon one plane, and the desire to wield that power in the world external to our minds awakes. It does not follow that we shall use that power well upon any plane. We may put a deadly green upon a man's face and produce a horror. We may make the rare and terrible blue moon to shine, or we may cause woods to spring with silver leaves and rams to wear fleeces of gold, and put hot fire into the belly of the cold worm. But in such fantasy as it is called, a new form is made. Fairy begins. Man
Mm.
becomes sub-creator.
Mm. Can we stop
Want
there?
to comment? Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. So coeval means having the same age or date of origin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and that was in that the incarnate mind, the tongue, and the tail are in our world coeval. Um, this is like something that's becoming more relevant, or it's kind of a relevance realization moment for me, like as John Vervaeke would say, that these adjectives that he like the way he's talking about this as entering fairy, um, and I really wonder your thoughts on this. The mind that thought of light, heavy, gray, yellow, still, swift, also conceived of magic that would make heavy things light and able to fly, turn gray lead into yellow gold, and the still rock into swift water. When we can take green from grass, blue from heaven, and red from blood, we have already an enchanter's power. Like when I'm reading the stories in the scriptures now, they're seeming to be more and more like that to me all the time. Instead of being literal, right? Like there's and I think I think, and I'm not as exposed to it as many Orthodox Christians are, but it's the iconography, because they use those modes as well, right? Like they have the different colors for the different robes, which hold symbolic meaning. And what's the other thing I wanted to say about this? I don't know if I can even really articulate it the way I want to, but like when he says that they make heavy things light and able to fly, we think of that as some kind of silliness, but I'm wondering if it's saying something. Well, I know it is, but like it's saying something more, right? More than what you're just reading on the page. So if you're reading a myth and they're making a heavy thing fly, they're saying something, and I don't know what, but they're saying something more than just that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. What
It's
have you got
interesting.
any thoughts on that?
He says that okay, such incantations might indeed be said to be only another view of adjectives, a part of speech in a
Yeah.
mythical grammar. So that is really interesting, a mythical grammar, as
Yeah, that's
opposed
what I
to,
mean. That's what I'm talking
yeah,
to about. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So there's like literal, in grammar in the linguistic sense of the word, like
Yeah.
parts of speech and their connections and pronouns and etc. But there's mythical grammar as well,
Right.
and adjectives. The invention of the adjectives is really like an enchanter's power,
Right.
basically. And it's interesting that when I write, and I wrote more poetry before, mostly in Russian, but
Yeah.
it's the process of looking for an adjective is
Yes.
really magical. Well, looking for a word is magical, but looking for an adjective, because you know what it is that you're looking for. And for example, this tree right outside, I'm seeing, it's not exactly green. Part of it is dark green, part of it is like lattice type of green,
Yeah.
and part of it is really dark. And if I look at it at this palette, is it palette or palette?
Palette.
Uh, palette. All right. And if I just see what meets the eye, it's just going to be the tints of the green, right?
Right.
But there's also mythical grammar to this. In other words, I can penetrate the appearance of green and see much more there. And
Yeah.
I might find an adjective there that is going to really be the right one,
Mhm.
and that it's going to make the whole thing fly, almost
Yeah.
immediately.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I'm thinking about how Meister Eckhart describes God as the green God, and he in other places he also describes him as the birthing God, the God that's constantly giving birth. Right? He
Mhm.
said in one of his things, he says that he's God is laying on a birthing couch and just constantly giving birth. Um, and green is spring, right? Like green is really associated with new birth. The whole
Mhm.
world is kind of exploding with life and birth. All the animals are giving birth. Everything is birthing, you know?
Mhm.
And so, when you hear the story of the green man, for example, he's not just a tree or a part of the forest or green. He's
Mhm.
the title to me is talking about birth, because that is the ancient description of green in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Or that, no, that's not the description of green. That's what green describes,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
so when they use these adjectives, and we've lost, I think we've lost a lot of that, like because of the literalness of our culture. We're looking for
Mm-hmm.
something that gets to the, we get abstracted because we're looking for the perfect word, like the perfect description,
Mm-hmm.
instead of letting it be a description of something huge,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
simple word for something as big as, the whole cosmos giving birth in the spring or something. That's
Yeah.
green. That's
Yeah.
green.
It is green.
You know? Yeah.
And each color in itself has some mythical significance, I believe.
Yeah.
Like that, it doesn't strike me as accidental that the sky is blue.
Mhm.
I mean, would it make any difference if it was yellow? I think it would.
Yeah.
I can't always tell why, but I can feel it. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes my mind is empty because I can't really analyze why what difference would it make, but it would. Because
Yeah.
sometimes the sky is yellow, by the way.
Yeah.
uh, but I
It's
like it to be blue, and
right.
uh, I tend to think it's not just because I'm used to seeing it blue most of the time, sometimes gray, but blue actually does corresponds to something in me, I believe, in us.
Yeah.
It's a visible expression of the idea of Plato would say of the idea of blueness, which we all understand. The soul understand what it is to be blue. There
Yeah.
was a Soviet era bard who wrote the whole song about the color blue, and then as he goes through the song, he basically says that this is blue in my life. This is blue. This is like sky blue. This is blue. This is blue. And so he creates this whole picture of the mythology of blue in his life.
Right, right.
Anyway.
Well, the Theotokos is often blue,
Hmm.
and,
Sky.
yeah, the Queen of Heaven, right? Um, I'm just looking this up on, because I'm not as well versed in these things as I should be, but, Mary's purity, her role as the mother of God, her connection to the heavens, and blue is frequently used in her garments and veils. And I looked that up because Soloviev, whenever he talks about Sophia, she has these eyes of azure blue, right? Like, it's a big theme in his poetry about Sophia, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it's just really interesting. Like we would go, oh, okay, so Sophia's got blue eyes, right? Well, no, there's a whole lot going
Hmm.
on there. Which I think that's what Tolkien is pointing at, when he says that line, um, when we can take green from grass, blue from heaven, and red from blood, we have already an enchanter's power.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
like, I don't know this for sure, but I'm just imagining that the color red in iconography, for example, is going to have a deep significance, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
But then that's also interesting to me that when we first see the redness of blood, we see more than just the external color. You know, we get something. We really receive some message from that redness, and then as sub creators, we can really transfer that redness onto like the eyes of dragon, or of a
Right,
dragon, or it's something else. We can make this transfer because we have that right as sub creators.
right,
What we caught from that, redness of the blood,
right.
we can then, you know, extrapolated and see it, in other places with the
Yeah,
same
like
significance.
it's coming to my mind now, that thing that I read in that other episode with Nate of when Tolkien saw the Gotland sheep, and he noticed that the sheen on their fleeces would hide them under the silver of moonlight, and he transferred that experience into making the elven cloaks, the invisible
Hmm.
cloaks, out of it, right? So he took the invisibility of the sheep in the moonlight and he transferred it onto the hobbits in the cloak, which is very much, I think, what he's getting at. As the sub-creator, he did that, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You want
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I'll keep reading.
Okay.
An essential power of fairy is thus the power of making immediately effective by the will the visions of fantasy. Not all are beautiful or even wholesome, not at any rate the fantasies of fallen man. And he has stained the elves who have this power in verity or fable with his own stain. This aspect of mythology, subcreation, rather than either representation or symbolic interpretation of the beauties and terrors of the world, is, I think, too little considered. Is that because it is seen rather in fairy than upon Olympus? Because it is thought to belong to the lower mythology rather than to the higher? There has been much debate concerning the relation of these things, of folk tale and myth. But even if there had been no debate, the question would require some notice in any consideration of origins, however brief. At one time, it was a dominant view that all such matter was derived from nature myths. The Olympians were personifications of the sun, of dawn, of night, and so on, and all the stories told about them were originally myths. Allegories would have been a better word, of the greater elemental changes and processes of nature. Epic, heroic legend, saga then localized these stories in real places and humanized them by attributing them to ancestral heroes, mightier than men and yet already men. And finally, these legends, dwindling down, became folk tales, Märchen, fairy stories, nursery tales. That would seem to be the truth almost upside down. The nearer the so-called nature myths or allegory of the large processes of nature is to the supposed archetype, the less interesting it is, and indeed the less is it of a myth capable of throwing any illumination whatever on the and
Mhm.
indeed the less is it indeed the less is it a myth capable of throwing any illumination whatever on the world. Let us assume for a moment, as this theory assumes, that nothing actually exists corresponding to the gods of mythology, no personalities, only astronomical or meteorological objects. Then these natural objects can only be arrayed with a personal significance and glory by a gift, the gift of a person, of a man. Personality can only be derived from a person. The gods may derive their color and beauty from the high splendors of nature, but it was man who obtained these for them, abstracted them from sun and moon and cloud. Their personality they get direct from him. The shadow or flicker of divinity that is upon them they received through him from the invisible world, the supernatural. There is no fundamental distinction between the higher and lower mythologies. Their people live, if they live at all, by the same life, just as the mortal world, just as in the mortal world do kings and peasants.
So, have you ever heard that somebody asked Tolkien once if Middle Earth was real? And he said, "Of course
Yeah,
it's real." I think
yeah,
this would
yeah.
be why he thinks that,
Hmm.
right?
Yep. Yeah, it is real. Mhm. And later on in this essay, he says that the moment you believe it is not real, it loses its enchantment.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of a narrative is for you to believe that it is true
Right.
within the logic of the narrative, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael Martin recently wrote a piece on Substack and he talked about it too. Well, actually, I don't know if he wrote it in the Substack. Yeah, I think he did. Anyway, he talked about it on his channel as well. But he's been reading the Mabagonian, which are these Welsh um,
Mm,
fairy tales,
mhm,
folk tales. And he proposed that maybe it's actual history,
mhm,
which is kind of like a step in the right direction, like a step in the direction that Tolkien's trying to take us, right?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, yeah.
Actually, interesting. Tolkien actually says a little bit later down as we do the reading, he actually says that history and myth sometimes coincide so much that they're almost indistinguishable.
Wow.
And I do get that because sometimes I look at the Russian history or any history at all.
Yeah.
When you look at it long enough, all of a sudden you start seeing
Mm.
mythological patterns
Right, right, right.
that really like pop out of the history. And
Yeah.
then you're almost able to say, okay, are we going to break out of this cycle or are we going to just continue running that fate, the circles of whatever the fate
Yeah.
circles,
Yeah.
because it's amazing.
Yeah. That is amazing. Yeah. Um, okay. Do you want to keep reading?
Yes, yes. Okay, he's going to go to 4 now, which is an interesting passage, I think. Let us take what looks like a clear case of Olympian nature myth, the Norse god Thor. His name is Thunder, of which Thor is the Norse form. And it is not difficult to interpret his hammer, Mjolnir, as lightning. How do you pronounce this? Mjolnir?
I think you did a great job.
Mjolnir. Well, I'm just, that's how they transliterated into Russian. Mjolnir.
Yeah. No, so
Yeah.
that's good. Yeah.
Okay, good. Uh, Yet Thor has, as far as our late records go, a very marked character or personality which cannot be found in thunder or lightning, even though some detail can, as it were, be related to these natural phenomena. For instance, his red beard, his loud voice, and his violent temper, his blundering and smashing strength. Nonetheless, it is asking a question without much meaning if we inquire which came first, nature allegories about personalized thunder in the mountains, splitting rocks and trees, or stories about an irascible, not very clever red-beard farmer of a strength beyond common measure, a person in all but mere stature, very like the northern farmers, the Bönder by whom Thor was chiefly beloved. To a picture of such a man, Thor may be held to have dwindled, or from it, the god may be held to have been enlarged,
Mm,
but I doubt whether either view is right, not by itself, nor if you insist that one of these things must precede the other. It is more reasonable to suppose that the farmer popped up the very moment when thunder got a voice and a face,
mm.
that there was a distant growl of thunder in the hills every time a storyteller heard a farmer in a rage. I have
Wow.
to stop here. I
That's
have to stop here. Yeah.
yes,
Uh,
that is amazing.
yeah, I thought about it before. That basically the last sentence kind of explains it all. So
Mhm.
there's distant growl of thunder in the hills. And at that very second, a storyteller would hear a farmer in a rage.
Yeah. And
And that's how Thor came into existence.
yeah, and I can and You know what? I can track with that line of reasoning because a thunderstorm, if you're a farmer, it can do good things for your crops, especially if it's in the spring. But if it's later in the season, it can bring hail. It can flatten crops if it rains hard enough, so that
Mhm,
like if you've got standing wheat and you're ready to harvest and then a thunderstorm comes, or you're ready to hay and then a thunderstorm comes, it can lay it all down.
mhm,
And of course you would hear a farmer in a rage at that point, right? Like
mhm,
the coincidence of thunder and a raging farmer would probably be more frequent than anything else.
mhm.
He'd be like, "Oh, I have to get my crops in, it's here it comes," kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Mhm,
Or everything's flattened and down and soaked or flooded, and yeah, you'd have a raging farmer. So that's really
mhm.
interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah, what's also interesting is that I just thought about it a while ago. If you remember in some of the medieval art, like for example, I believe it is in Botticelli's uh, The Birth of Aphrodite, um, that you see the west wind, the zephyr,
Mhm.
having a face. So it
Mm.
has a clear personality. The one that carries Aphrodite kind of blows as she's born. He keeps blowing and carries her all the way to the island.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
yeah, and then you see the face, and it's a very gentle wind, like
Mhm.
enough to puff up some foam, you
Mhm.
know. And but you see the face, and I was always interested. Why would myth makers and artists really want to depict something like a force of nature with a face? And I've seen it many paintings that basically we want to divine a face out of something very sort of impersonal, you know. And and then I realized that it's we there is a face behind everything, basically. And we just when we are able to look beyond the appearances, we can't help seeing a face
Right.
because everything is personal ultimately.
Right.
And so here, I believe Tolkien is talking about something very similar. That there's this roll of thunder, uh, and we see in the thunder a lot more than the thunder allows us to see. Actually,
Mhm.
I mean, it is, of course, it can flatten, the crops. It can do all kind of stupid things, um, and it is powerful and it is loud, etc. But then the face of Thor is not really derivable from all those characteristics per se. You really want to kind of go beyond that and see a raging farmer,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
right there at the moment, and then
Mhm.
realize, okay, this is the face of Thor.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
So,
I meant to tell you this before we recorded, and I forgot. But it's funny that you mentioned the face of the wind because I had a dream the other night, like 4 nights ago or something, that I was in the forest walking with the wind. The wind was
mm,
walking with me, and it was a like a the body, I could see the face, but the body was like kind of like a shimmery outline, and that you couldn't see any kind of, you could only see the form, like the silhouette, but it would appear and disappear with the light.
mm,
And but the face was made of dragonfly wings,
mm.
and then the eyes were very distinct.
Yeah,
And
that's interesting.
and I was walking with the wind, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in this form in the woods. That's
Mm-hmm.
all I remember. There was nothing exchanged or anything. It was just
Yeah, but that.
it was an
Yeah.
amazing face. Like I'm like, oh my god, those are dragonfly. The patterns on dragonfly wings. and they were
Uh-huh.
like
Uh-huh.
they were here, and then they were like here, and yeah, it
Mm,
was really amazing.
mm. Uh, the book, the fantastic book that you have, what
Mhm.
kind of front cover do you have? What is on the front cover?
It's gray. I don't have it here right now. Um, Let me just see if I can find it.
Hmm.
I don't seem to have it handy.
Okay, let me
I
get let
got,
me get one out. It's
I
here.
got,
I can see it.
I got books stacked up all over the place, and I
Uh,
keep forgetting what's in which pile.
yeah.
Terrible.
Okay. I don't know if you have this edition. Oops. Sorry.
Mm, No, I don't have that one. No,
All right. Okay.
it's a newer one. I think I
Because
have one on my Kindle too.
okay. So it's interesting here. When I first saw this edition, if you can see that there are faces on the trees. I mean, those evil
Oh yeah, yeah,
trees and evil spirits, they have faces. And I
yes,
remember I remember looking at it kind of mesmerized and thinking, oh yeah, yeah, there's a distinct character to everything. But
right,
if we just go by the appearances, we won't be able to perceive those faces.
right.
You
This is the
know.
one I have. This is the one. I don't know if you can see it. I
Uh-huh.
have to turn the light down here. Maybe that'll help.
Uh-huh.
Can you see that?
I can see the reflection of myself. Okay. All right. Yeah. Two figures. I can see
Two figures,
two
yeah.
figures. Yeah.
Like angels and clouds. That's all I've got. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Well, mhm,
I was just finished my thought. One
yeah,
thing I was going to say is that when we were little, back in the USSR days,
yeah,
uh, we lived in a pretty old apartment, and so in the bathroom, the walls were like, I mean, the covering of the wall. I probably would not be able to I don't know the exact material they used to cover it, but it's just like some sort of patty that they put on it, and then they just not whitewash, they just painted it
yeah,
all of it. So as a child, I'd be there and I'd have some time for myself, and
yeah,
all I'd be doing is looking at the walls because they made really strange patterns.
yeah.
Those lines and something bulging, and I
Right.
would see a lot of faces, and
Yeah.
now, of course, there weren't any faces there, at least the people who, did the repairs didn't put any faces
No,
there.
no.
But I believe it is inside the human being to
Yes.
see a face in everything.
Yeah.
And Tolkien's Treebeard and the ants, they all have faces, and it couldn't be otherwise, really.
Right. No, that's right.
Yeah.
And that's that little verse that Henry Sutton wrote at the beginning of one of the Fantastic chapters. All that man sees is man, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That's that's that same principle that, that you're just finding faces in everything. And
Hmm.
it's true too, like at twilight you often mistake, and this is what happens in Fantastes, he mistakes rocks, trees, and bushes for human forms,
Hmm.
and out of his peripheral vision. But when he looks straight at them, which is a really great metaphor, I think, they become a rock. Oh, it's just a rock. Oh, it's just a tree. It's just a bush,
Hmm.
right? And so
Hmm.
it's kind of like If you want to stay enchanted, you have to stay within the periphery of your vision. You can't
Yeah.
have that targeted analytical take on the world, right? Otherwise, like you said earlier, you disenchant everything.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And by the way, interestingly, you know, scientifically speaking, when an observer starts observing, like really peering and gazing at something, uh, then the wave turns into particles, and basically
Oh,
everything becomes separated and falls apart. The
really?
moment we stop looking at something, we look away, everything turns into a wave again. That's scientific fact.
Oh, that's
You know, I wouldn't
amazing.
be able to formulate it, but I did write an article about that a while ago, where I had better language than I can
That's
explain it. But
great.
yeah, yeah. So if I don't look at the world, it is a wave. When I look at it, as an observer, I start splitting it and
Right.
dividing it into particles.
Your sound suddenly
Oh,
staticky.
is that better?
No.
No. Let me try to.
Are you
Let me
losing
try,
are you losing your charge maybe?
maybe I'm gonna turn them off and see how if you can
Okay.
hear me without. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you good.
Okay, good, good, good. So
You might
yeah,
have
basically,
yeah, keep going. It sounds good.
yeah, okay. I forgot what I was saying.
Well, you were talking about the wave and when you look directly at
Oh,
something, it becomes particles.
yes, yes, yes. So going back to what you just said,
Yeah.
um, when I don't look, like when I'm in the mountains and I don't really look like peer directly at something,
Yeah.
then I'm able to see everything, like how everything is participating in one dance, and everything is alive. But the moment
Right.
I really focus on, like get fixated on something, I split the dance and alienate things from each other,
Oh,
and they
that's
produce.
interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a lot of thoughts about that because there's this idea I've thought of when Adam and Eve um, take from the tree and they realize their nakedness. I've always like I thought to myself, well, the only way they could realize their nakedness is by looking down,
Hmm.
which would be that kind of targeted approach, right? Where if you don't realize you're naked, you're just la la la, you're in the waves, right? Like you're in the whole world. But then when you focus in on the thing, your body, for example, in this case, and realize, then you're in dual, like it seems to me like you're describing a kind of duality, right? When
Hmm.
everything falls apart, like it splits off from the dance.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
Should I read?
Yes, please.
Okay. Um, Thor must, of course, be reckoned a member of the higher aristocracy of mythology, one of the rulers of the world. Yet the tale that is told of him in Thrymkivtha, in the Elder Edda, is certainly just a fairy story. It is old as far as Norse poems go, but that is not far back, say AD 900 or a little earlier in this case. But there is no real reason for supposing that this tale is unprimitive at any rate in quality. That is because it is of folk tale kind and not very dignified. If we would go backwards in time, the fairy story might be found to change in details or to give way to other tales, but there would always be a fairy tale as long as there was any Thor. When the fairy tale ceased, there would be just thunder, which no human ear had yet heard. Something really higher is occasionally glimpsed in mythology: divinity, the right to power, as distinct from its possession, the due of worship. Due and as in DUE, it's due some worship. In fact, religion.
Hmm.
Okay, I'll just read that again. Something really higher is occasionally glimpsed in mythology, divinity, the right to power, as distinct from its possession, the due of worship. In fact, religion. Andrew Lang said, and is by some still commended for saying, that mythology and religion, in the strict sense of that word, are two distinct things that have become inextricably entangled, though mythology is in itself almost devoid of religious significance. There's a footnote there. Should I read it?
Hmm.
This is born out of the more careful and sympathetic study of primitive peoples, that is, people still living in an inherited paganism who are not, as we say, civilized. The hasty survey finds only their wilder tales. A closer examination finds their cosmological myths. Only patience and inner knowledge discovers their philosophy and religion, the truly worshipful of which the quote unquote gods are not necessarily an embodiment at all, or only in a variable measure, often decided by the individual. Yet these things have in fact become entangled, or maybe they were sundered long ago and have since groped slowly through a labyrinth of error, through confusion, back towards refusion. Even fairy stories as a whole have three faces: the mystical towards the supernatural, the magical towards nature, and the mirror of scorn and pity towards man. The essential face of fairy is the middle one, the magical. But the degree in which the others appear, if at all, is variable and may be decided by the individual storyteller. The magical, the fairy story, may be used as a mirror de l'homme, and it may, but not so easily, be made a vehicle of mystery. This, at least, is what George MacDonald attempted, achieving stories of power and beauty when he succeeded, as in The Golden Key, which he called a fairy tale, and even when he partly failed, as in Lilith, which he called a romance. For a moment, let us return to the soup that I mentioned above. Speaking of the history of stories, and especially of fairy stories, we may say that the pot of soup, that's all capitalized, the cauldron of story, has always been boiling, and to it have continually been added new bits, dainty and undainty. For this reason, to take a casual example, the fact that a story resembling the one known as the Goose Girl, the Gansemagd in Grimm, or the Gensemagd in Grimm, is told in the 13th century of Bertha Broadfoot, mother of Charlemagne, really proves nothing either way, neither that the story was, in the 13th century, descending from Olympus or Asgard by way of an already legendary king of old, on its way to become a house märchen, nor that it was on its way up. The story is found to be widespread, unattached to the mother of Charlemagne or to any historical character. From this fact by itself, we certainly cannot deduce that it is not true of Charlemagne's mother, though that is the kind of deduction that is most frequently made from that kind of evidence. The opinion that the story is not true of Bertha Broadfoot must be founded on something else, on features in the story which the critic's philosophy does not allow to be possible in real life, so that he would actually disbelieve the tale, even if it were found nowhere else, or on the existence of good historical evidence that Bertha's actual life was quite different, so that he would disbelieve the tale, even if his philosophy allowed that it was perfectly possible in quote unquote real life. No one, I fancy, would discredit a story that the Archbishop of Canterbury slipped on a banana skin merely because he found that a similar comic mishap had been reported of many people, and especially of elderly gentlemen of dignity. He might disbelieve the story if he discovered that in it an angel or even a fairy had warned the Archbishop that he would slip if he wore gaiters on a Friday. He might also disbelieve the story if it was stated to have occurred in the period, say, between 1940 and 1945. So much for that. It is an obvious point, and it has been made before, but I venture to make it again, although it is a little beside my present purpose, for it is constantly neglected by those who concern themselves with the origins of tales. Shall I read on, or do you want to stop here?
Let's stop here.
Okay.
Mm. Yeah. So, um,
What are you thinking about?
well, I'm still thinking about the soup and the cauldron of the story.
Right.
We talked about that already. I'm trying to remember the name of this fairy tale in Russian if I've read it. I don't know if I've read it. Maybe I did. Uh, but, Gansenmarkt,
The Goose Girl.
Goose Girl, yeah. Okay. Um, but so I'm not sure about this story because I don't remember. Maybe I know the plot, but I'm not sure. But just the whole idea of the pot of soup always boiling,
Yeah.
and we have continually been adding new bits, dainty and dainty to it. We already talked about that, but it's really um, interesting to see how it kind of it's still happening, I believe.
Yeah.
Uh, if you're careful and if you can be like conscious of your own life and what's going on with you on a daily basis, uh, like for instance, each day we enter each day, uh, and on the one hand, our experience is built on what we already know and what we already seen, what we've
Mhm.
already seen. There's like there's some pot of soup already boiling, full of the familiar
Right.
ingredient.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, the new day will offer something new, like a new experience, or if we're like conscious enough, and then we realize that what we had before, this cauldron, you know, is not enough, and we must add some new dainty, new ingredient in the soup,
Right.
uh, because something else appears to our field of consciousness
Right.
that we didn't encounter before. And then what do we do? We probably should borrow it somewhere. I mean, there's this new element. We should have a name for it. We may at first feel it, however, vaguely, but then our consciousness kind of scans whatever we can find. Either we're looking for an adjective or we're looking for something familiar in fairy tales or in other people's stories or something. And then when we're able to capture that new ingredient and element, we add it to the soup and it changes the entire taste of what we had before.
Right.
So,
So just help me out here. Like when I was reading that, I was getting like just help me out to know if I got this right about Berta Broadfoot. So some people believed that the Gensey Milk was about Berta Broadfoot, but
mhm,
he's arguing that it's not necessarily about her. Could be about her. Depends on when the story's told. I mean, that's kind of like maybe part these additives to the soup make it about her, right?
mm,
Like after the
mm,
fact. Um, but there's enough ingredients in this cauldron of story that it's going to represent a king's wife or a mother, sorry, a king's mother is
mm,
going to have, and I'm trying to avoid the use of this, but it keeps popping up in my head, a stereotypical, um, like there's a stereotype. I
mhm,
guess mythology would call it an archetype, right?
mhm,
Of
mhm,
what a king's mother is, or and and the Gänsemarkt or the goose girl somehow resembles this archetype over time, and that through the centuries people can add their bits, right, and make it
mhm,
about Berta, for example.
mhm,
But it doesn't mean it's only about Berta. It's about this
mhm.
archetypal king's mother or something to that effect,
Yeah.
or the archetypal feminine, or I don't know. I don't know the story either. So,
Mm,
um, but what do you think of that? Is that what he's saying? Like,
I think
that's how I
so.
understood it.
Yeah, that sounds right, I think. And
Okay.
he's referring it back to the origin of fairy tale, of which comes first. And I do believe that, what you're saying really hits the nail.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, because when I read fairy tales, I don't know if that's what he means here exactly, but um, I think that's what he's saying. That basically, um, you feel that. I mean, by reading a fairy tale, we feel what that archetype is.
Mhm, mhm.
We get
They
that
resemble something to us, like
resemblance.
yeah,
Yes, we find parallels. And then we can apply it
right.
to either the Bertha or whoever. We can apply it because it has a wide range of applications. Depending on what kind of soup we want to have in the end, we will add the right element at the right time because we believe that that's really represents what we're seeing in a particular person, you know, um, in our context.
Yeah. The the idiosyncrasy of that particular person
Hmm.
seems to be embodied in the character in the story. Like, it
Hmm.
seems like we're really good at because we're pattern seeking, don't you think?
Sure.
So, like, we see patterns in other human beings too, right? Like, we see their idiosyncrasies over over time. Um, like, oh, I used to play a game when I lived with a house full of people. We'd play these, charades
Hmm.
where we would pick somebody in the house, like our roommate, right? And we'd have to act out them, and everyone would have to guess who it was. We all knew it was somebody in the room, right? We all that was the game we played.
Hmm.
And and it was always so much fun because you could act out what you perceived as the patterns of idiosyncrasies in that person,
Hmm.
and oftentimes that was enough for everybody to go, "Oh, that's this person," you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then when someone would act you out, like, if someone got my name and they were acting out me, I would be blind to it
Hmm.
in a weird way. Like, I wouldn't know what my idiosyncrasies were unless it was something, like, historical, that I did at some point, and then everybody but if it was just, like, my personal yeah,
It's
it's just
interesting that you
interesting.
mentioned that because sometimes I cannot really see what mythological reality I represent, for
Right.
instance.
Yeah.
It's the other person
Yeah.
who is conscious enough that is able to perceive it and tell me.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, we actually had a really fun time several years ago, actually a lot of years ago, a couple decades ago, back in my this church that in my hometown in Siberia. So there was a bunch of people, and we were really close, and we still are actually. And it was the time when a lot of the good movies came out, like Matrix and
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, and we were like watching all that and reading the books together. We actually hosted a literary club
Oh,
in our
nice.
home. And but one day, I don't know how it happened. We were sitting and having tea, probably somebody's birthday, but all of a sudden we started sharing with each other what literary heroes we see in each other.
Mhm.
And
Oh.
there was one particular person. I mean, everybody would just like point at him and say, "You are Neo from the Matrix." Because what you do is really, I mean, it was really clear that all he did in his life was he was trying to pull people out of the Matrix.
Right.
He just did it without even thinking. you
Right.
know.
Right, right.
And then, of course, the story when the myth, the movie, the Matrix movie, when it came out, it just gave me the adjective, basically, or the word to describe what I saw mythically, in that person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And telling him that, uh, because I wanted to feed him that soup. That's the kind of taste that he gave me, and I wanted to tell him this is how it tastes. And it was also in my cauldron, for
Yeah,
him.
that's great. That's a great analogy, actually. Should I keep reading? Or
Yeah, I think
did you have
do
more?
another paragraph. Yeah.
We'll try to make some tracks today.
Mm.
Okay. But what of the banana skin? Our business with it really only begins when it has been rejected by historians. It is more useful when it has been thrown away. That's a great line. The historian would be likely to say that the banana skin story, quote, became attached to the archbishop, unquote, as he does say on Fair Evidence that the, quote, the goose girl Märchen became attached to Bertha. That way of putting it is harmless enough in what is commonly known as history, but it is really a good description of what is going on and has gone on in the history of story making. Oh no, sorry, that's a question. But is it really a good description of what is going on and has gone on in the history of story making? I do not think so. I think it would be nearer to the truth to say that the archbishop became attached to the banana skin or that Bertha had turned into the goose girl. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get across. I don't know if I did a good job of it. Better still, I would say that Charlemagne's mother and the archbishop were put into the pot. In fact, got into the soup. They were just new bits added to the stock. Considerable honor, for in that soup were many things older, more potent, more beautiful, comic, or terrible than they were in themselves, considered simply as figures of history. It seems fairly plain that Arthur, once historical, but perhaps as such not of great importance, was also put into the pot. There he boiled for a long time, together with many other old figures and devices of mythology and fairy, and even some other stray bones of history, such as Alfred's defense against the Danes, until he emerged as a king of fairy. The situation is similar in the great northern Arthurian court of the Shield Kings of Denmark, the Skildingas of ancient English tradition. King Hrothgar and his family have many manifest marks of true history, far more than Arthur. Yet even in the older English accounts of them, they are associated with many figures and events of fairy story. They have been in the pot. But I refer now to the remnants of the oldest recorded English tales of fairy, or its borders, in spite of the fact that they are little known in England, not to discuss the turning of the bear boy into the knight Beowulf, or to explain the intrusion of the ogre Grendel into the royal hall of Hrothgar. I wish to point to something else that these traditions contain, a singularly suggestive example of the relation of the fairy tale element to gods and kings and nameless men, illustrating, I believe, the view that this element does not rise or fall, but is there in the cauldron of the story, waiting for the great figures of myth and history, and for the yet nameless he or she, waiting for the moment when they are cast into the simmering stew, one by one or all together, without consideration of rank or precedence. Do you want to stop or shall I go on?
I think we could stop. Really, really good.
You know what's coming to my mind here
Mhm.
is the fish that it's in Fantasties, where there's these fish covered in feathers, and the girl has to pull, or is that in? No, it's The Golden Key by George MacDonald. I happen to have it here.
Okay. I haven't finished it. I have to finish it.
There's these fish. Oh, it's right here. Look at this. Here it is. Okay, so let me just read this really quick. Um, so the fish Tangle, the little girl, was put into a bath, and the fish cleaned her and ministered to her, and they could fly, and they lifted her out of the bath and all this stuff. Um, where is this now? Anyway, she has to take one of the fish and put it in the pot. And okay, so let me read here. She took off the girl's nightgown, rose with her in her arms, and going to the wall of the cottage, opened a door. This is Sophia, the divine feminine, Mother Nature is that's where Tangle lives. She lives in her cottage. And going to the wall of the cottage, opened a door. Then Tangle saw a deep tank, the sides of which were filled with green plants, which had flowers of all colors. There was a roof over it, like the roof of a cottage, filled with beautiful clear water, in which swam a multitude of such fishes as the one that had led her to the cottage. It was light. It was the light their colors gave that showed the place in which they were. Um, then she has the bath with the fishes. I'm trying to find the place where she has to take them out. But anyways, so first she got bread out of the hole in the wall, then milk out of the other, then several kinds of fruit out of a third, and then she went to the pot on the fire and took out the fish, now nicely cooked. And as soon as she had pulled off its feathered skin, ready to be eaten. But, exclaimed Tangle, and she stared at the fish and could say no more because these fish were really kind to her. I know what you mean, said the lady. You do not like to eat the messenger that brought you home. But it is the kindest return you can make. The creature was afraid to go until it saw me put the pot on and heard me promise it should be boiled the moment it returned with you. Then it darted out of the door at once. You saw it go into the pot of itself the moment it entered, did you not? So the fish went out and got Tangle and led her back to the cottage and then jumped in the pot. Okay. I did, answered Tangle, and I thought it very strange. But then I saw you and I forgot all about the fish. In fairyland, resumed the lady as they sat down to the table, the ambition of the animals is to be eaten by the people, for that is their highest end in that condition. But they are not therefore destroyed. Out of that pot comes something more than the dead fish. You will see. I think I'm just like wondering if Tolkien is riffing on that.
Yeah. Mm,
Yeah, interesting. There's more to it, but I won't read it right now. Because
yeah.
that really stood out to me, that part, and I thought, oh, okay, so but these fish are very mythological, like they're feathered and they fly and they're super colorful and uh, and and they fly through the forest, but they're fish and they find the girl and then they fly home with her, and when they're cooked, they actually turn into something else afterwards, and she lets them go again. So, where is that now? Let's see if I can find it. Um, okay, here. As soon as the fish was eaten, the lady went to the fire and took the lid off the pot. A lovely little creature in a human shape with large white wings rose out of it and flew around and round the roof of the cottage, then dropped fluttering and nestled in the lap of the lady. She spoke to it some strange words, carried it to the door, and threw it out into the darkness. Tangle heard the flapping of its wings die away in the distance. Now, have we done the fish any harm? She said. No, answered Tangle. I do not think we have. I should not mind eating one every day.
mm. That's
Yeah,
good.
so they live on, right? In a
Sure,
human form
sure.
with wings. It's
With wings,
amazing.
yeah. Wow, that's good. But it's interesting that here he mentions um, fairly, okay, it's just Arthur,
Yeah. Mhm.
and it's clear that he was also put in the pot,
Yeah.
and there he was boiled for a long time, you know, and then until he emerged as the king of fairy. And
Yeah.
what's interesting to me is that when I read and watch some Arthurian stories of the Arthurian cycle, uh, it's really clear that whoever that person was, the real person, he must have made some choices that made people who observed him feel that he is much more than just a plain Arthur. And then they decided to throw him into the pot.
Hmm.
So it's like I was telling about I know our fun that we had as friends. We uh, looking at each other and observing each other, you clearly see there's more to each other that appears
Right.
on each side. And the more a person uh, is basically himself or herself, the more they become mythical. The more
Yeah.
mythical they become.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And so we're all waiting to be thrown into the pot. Mm.
Well, we're into an hour. Do you want to stop here?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good place to stop.
Okay. Okay, that sounds great. So we're at the great enemy of King Hrothgar was Froda, king of the Heathobards. Yeah, this is really helping me to I don't even know how to say it. Like I have a sense of the enchantment of the world of creation, the magical as he calls it. I have that like a natural sense of that.
Mhm,
But I've never been able to understand the linguistic um what would you call that? Like the development of language and how these things come to be in the form of a story, because that's what it is, right? It's language.
mhm.
So this is really, really, really helping me.
It's interesting in the beginning when we just started reading, when I started reading the first paragraph today, he actually talks about, the modern language being the distortion of the
Yeah.
language, capital
Yeah.
L. And so just referring to, in connection with what you just said also, uh, that, there's how would I put this? Um, Basically, there's more to language
Yeah.
than our culture allows us to see.
Yeah.
We can do pretty much. There's a mythical language, or a language that reflects that this mythical cauldron as best as like ideally, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And then by recovering that language, we allow basically we enter like Heidegger said, like language is house of being. We enter that house. We realize, okay, this is being that we're coming in contact with through the language.
Yeah, and what it makes me think of when you say that is how George MacDonald says in his imagination essay that the world is the human being turned inside out.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Mhm. Mhm.
Makes sense.
And it's from there that he derives language, from creation. He gives this little example of how a man looks around to express something inner, like I think before that he mentions, you can only get so far with making faces and grunting and pointing. When you want to tell something really heartfelt, you need a language. And
Mm,
so he looks around at creation and he pulls from creation. And he uses the word emotion as an example. I don't know the etymology of it, but I got just from what he's insinuating in the essay, emotion comes from uh, the word emotion comes from the movement of the wind on tall grass.
mm,
So you get this waving, right?
mhm, mhm,
And that's what emotion is. It's so the person looks at the tall grass moving and he pulls a word out of that to
Yeah.
describe how he feels inside of himself, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so the creation is that's why he can say, "Is the human being turned inside out?" Right? It's all that is inside outside of you. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. I like it. It really connects well with what Tolkien was saying,
Yeah.
in the first one, in the first paragraph about borrowing the redness from the blood and the greenness from the green
Yes.
to blue and the blueness from the sky, because
Mhm.
there's a lot more to blueness and than our rational mind allows for.
Right, like, it's not just blue, it's what you said at the beginning, it's you want it to be blue,
Hmm.
because with the blue sky comes the good feelings, the spaciousness.
Yeah.
It's the inner world, right, that
Yep.
gets expressed in the presence of the blue sky, whereas if it was a yellow sky and, like, I've had that too with forest fires, it's doom and gloom, it's like Mordor, right? Uh,
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have a whole other world of feeling coming out of that, right?
Yeah. Like
So
like in St. Petersburg, for instance, in the wintertime, the sky is cloudy all the time. It's like
oh, yeah.
cloudy, overcast. And people live with that like for 4 months, maybe 5 months. Okay, there are some spells of the blue that they get,
Mhm.
but that whenever you can catch a glimpse of the blue during those 4 months, it's literally a celebration.
Wow.
I don't know what kind of hormones it turns into, like in your brain, but you feel those hormones like spurting into your bloodstream the moment you see just that little patch of blue.
Well, it must be
Oh,
dark up there too, right, in the winter? Like,
uh,
dark early?
darker, yes, yes, yeah. The light lasts just for maybe 4 or 5 hours at the
Oh, yeah. Mm.
most, you know.
Yeah,
But it's
so it's a dark
long
time.
been coming.
When I first moved to I'll end with this. When I first
Mm,
moved to Telegraph Creek, I, uh, I went into what they called the free store, which was just a shed in a woman's yard that people could drop stuff off that they didn't want. And there was a whole array of Dostoevsky, Solzhenitsyn, and Tolstoy. I
mm,
took Solzhenitsyn and Dostoevsky out, and I thought, I've heard of them, but I've never read them, and this will be my winter read. And, of course, we were in the far north, so we had very short days like you, and we actually didn't have any true sunshine. The sun stayed behind the mountains, it was so low. So the sun never came up above the mountains till the middle of February.
mm,
So you'd get this twilight feeling all day and then it'd be dark,
mm.
right? And I read Russian literature.
On top of that,
On top of that. Yeah, I think The Idiot was the last book that I was on, and by the end of the winter, and I didn't finish it. I was so angry with it, I just threw it.
yeah, well, that's exactly my feeling. I was so angry with Dostoevsky at how he ended it.
Oh, I
Like he
didn't
was
even
doing
get
so
to the end.
well. What happened to you? Uh, mm, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I still have it. Maybe I'll finish it one of these days, just out
Uh-huh.
of curiosity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Eugene, again, for another wonderful
Thank you.
reading and conversation. Really appreciate it.
Sure, sure. Interesting read. Thank you for the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And, thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
see you next time. Sure.
Yeah, see you next time.